Hey everyone, just Kristin here. We wanted to issue a light trigger warning for this episode because of the nature of the topic of witches and the historical context that we'll be discussing. There are some mentions of death, assault, and sexual assault throughout. Now, while we don't go into the specifics for each of these topics, we did want to warn you just in case any of those topics are going to be a sensitive issue for you today. Outside of that, we hope you enjoy the episode. Okay, welcome to the But Why podcast, where Laura and I spend about an hour questioning the human experience. This week we are talking about witches. This will be a part one discussing the kind of prehistory of witches. So yeah, do you want to kick us off, Laura?
My brain then just like slightly switched off. Kick us off.
It is
I
Friday.
suppose so. Yeah, do we want some general chit-chat first?
I suppose. I mean, we could be less awkward about things.
Kristin is like, oh, do we have to do some small talk? Can we not just start getting into the nitty-gritty of witches?
I know, but I think we never have small talk. That's why we have so many tangents.
Yeah, that is true. That does happen.
I thought what would be fun, Laura and I think have very different approaches to Halloween.
Oh my gosh, yes. I completely forgot that we were going to do this. Okay, yeah, I'm so glad that your brain is actually switched on.
I wouldn't go that far.
We do have different approaches to Halloween.
Yes. I'm obsessed with Halloween, which we might be able to tell just by my general vibe. If you're watching instead of listening, I look like a witch half the time anyway. So we thought we would bring some fun old Halloween photos, one each. Otherwise, I'd be here forever. I don't know about you, Laura.
I wouldn't be able to do that. I would not have enough content.
So, do you
want to go first?
Sure,
you go first.
What I'll do, so if you're watching, you'll be able to see the pictures, and if you're listening, I'll describe it a little bit, or I think we should each describe each other's, because that would be funnier. So I'll show you it, then I'll upload it on the actual video. You have to guess which one's me, and you have to comment and describe it.
Are you at the back? At the very back?
Mm-hmm. The giant one?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so as a description of this, how do I describe this? Okay, the backdrop, there are some very strange, creepy looking
you're going full description
things. And then there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, one tiny child, two medium children, and then one very tall child, which I believe is Kristin. Mm-hmm. Kristin looks like she's about to kill something. You're rubbing your hands together with this super intense black lipstick on.
Yes, I'm dressed as a witch.
But some sparkles.
Yes,
some sparkles
witch
to kind of throw it off.
That's a pretty good description.
I love it.
A sparkly evil witch.
That's amazing.
That's probably how my husband would describe me.
Yes. You're in your true form.
In my true form, and what I truly wanted to be.
Yeah. So yeah, oh my God. You have to guess who I am.
Are you? You're the one with
Christmas vibe.
Yeah.
Halloween vibe is not great.
You're the only one not dressed up.
Yeah. That's me.
I like the theme because you're surrounded by 3 other witches, which is great, and you're just in a fleece sweater, cheesing at the camera.
Yeah. Living life.
With I think maybe a little malice in your eyes.
I do have red eyes. Something is going on there. But yeah, I always used to just refuse to dress up on Halloween. I think I just used to feel so awkward, having to dress up. And so I'd always prefer not to. So everyone else is getting dressed up as bin bag witches. And I'm like, you know what? No, I'm not doing that.
See, I felt awkward in normal life, and Halloween is my time to thrive.
I love that. I wish I was like that. I don't know what it is for me. There's something that just makes me feel so self-conscious when I have to dress up.
That's so funny.
And I was telling this to Matt before, and he was like, but you're like, that makes no sense because by not dressing up, you're the one that looks weird. I'm like, yeah, whoops.
You're like, read that one wrong.
Yeah, I know, right?
Story of our lives.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, I suppose I'll kick us off. So Laura and I have done quite a bit of research for this because while it's a topic of interest, it's not a topic of expertise. So a lot of the background of it is like the reasons for it is kind of like our areas of expertise, but not the exact topic of witches. So that was super cool and also super upsetting to do. And so I thought that I would start by reading something from a book. It's a really good book. It's called In Defense of Witches by Mona Chollet. It was translated from French. And it really talks about the past and present history of witches and why women are still on trial. And just to let you know, I hate reading out loud, so wish me luck. And don't judge me for my reading out loud voice. But I thought it would kind of get us started. So it says, imagine for a moment your witch, not your earliest witch necessarily, but the one who first captured your attention. Are you holding her in your mind? Imagine I can tell you some things about her. She's a woman, single and childless. She has her own little house, which she may or may not share with an animal. She's an artist, a craftswoman, or a scientist. If you imagine magic as a kind of science, she has an undeniable air of poise and a wonderful sense of style. It cannot be denied that she is wily, self-satisfied, and in charge of her own affairs. She commands respect. She is, to interesting people, someone worth learning from, if not emulating entirely. She is what happens when women get to direct the warp and weft of their own lives. So I thought that was an interesting one to kick us off.
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking about Sabrina the Teenage Witch though, and some of those things I don't think track, but some of them definitely do.
Well, I think it's interesting because the concept of the Good Witch wasn't really invented until The Wizard of Oz. And that was invented on purpose by the nephew of a feminist researcher writer who was really into researching the history of witches. And he kind of wanted to rewrite that history. And ever since then, we kind of had it interwoven more into pop culture where you can be positive. What's that? The witch from like the 70s, 80s show. You've got Sabrina the Teenage Witch. So it's more of like a positive twist, so that's really nice. But I think a lot of them kind of come out where she's cool, she has a sense of style, she has an animal, that kind of stuff.
And then like you say, if you think of the earlier kind of depictions, then that's certainly going more towards kind of, I suppose, the definition, or not definition, but the kind of passage that you're reading out. I suppose if we think about things like Snow White, I suppose. You might get more of an...
Like the old hag.
Yeah, that sort of image.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So clearly from my Halloween photo, I've always loved witches. I've been obsessed with witches as a child. And one of the things that really resonated with me in this book is it gives the idea that women can have some additional power. Now, obviously, this isn't like necessarily a conscious thing when you're like 12, but it just gave this idea that being unthreatening and dependent were not the only options available, which I quite liked the idea of. Like, you don't really see many kind of women in pop culture or in societal views, I guess, at least back in the day, that aren't, independent and maybe threatening to other people, that are positive or that give that kind of idea. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's almost interesting that we have to go so far as like witches and like, I suppose in a way, like kind of fantasy characters in order to find that. Like, it's not something that necessarily feels like it's based in reality. Obviously there is reality to it in terms of like what we're going to talk about today, like in terms of the history and like kind of the witch trials and so on. But nowadays it's almost like we're having to stretch that far to like think of these like fantastical kind of witches to see women as like strong and independent and so on. And obviously that's shifting, and we see a lot more of that in our world nowadays, but there is still this, I think, something really like special almost about looking to witches as that kind of, as that characterization of independence and strength in women.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you bring up, and it makes me think, and it's something we'll probably dig into more next episode. But the modern, it's how it still impacts us today when you're seeing powerful women. Like, for example, when Hillary Clinton lost the 2016 election, the slogan from both sides of the aisle was "Ding dong, the witch is dead."
Yeah.
So it's still there, and so I think that this episode will set the stage really well for the next episode. Another thing that this author Chalet writes is that our cultural and social response to women can't be unthreaded from our historic treatment of women perceived to be witches. And I think that's kind of why we chose this episode to kind of set the stage and chiefly focus on the witch hunts, if that makes sense. So before I get started on that, do you have anything to chime in, or do you want me to get going?
No, go for it.
Oh gosh,
I'm ready.
Okay. So one of the things that kept popping up for me is that we often kind of start to look at or consider the witch hunt as like something that's part of the Middle Ages. So quite dark, quite regressive, something that's, only happening with the super religious aspect of things. But when we actually look at it, they were most extensive during the Renaissance. Do we have a dog entry in the room?
The dog has entered.
Yay!
I'll have to see if he behaves or not.
Yeah.
Tell me if he's too loud.
It's always a bonus when we get a dog visitor. He's your familiar.
Oh yeah, he is.
But they were most extensive during the Renaissance, which we tend to look at as the time of enlightenment. As we'll see, it's the time of enlightenment in heavy quotes, but not for women. And there were still executions at the end of the 18th century for witchcraft. So it lasted a very long time, and it wasn't just tied to religion. So basically, it's a big melting pot or cauldron, you might say, that melts into a bunch of misogyny. It's important to note that like the witch hunts themselves have been so kind of like upfront in our minds that it takes away from the genuine historical roots of the witch as a magic user. So, magic is something that humans have always kind of considered. There's this thing in our brains that if we can't, understand the source of something, that will make an answer for it. And so a lot of the times that's where many religions can come from. That's where the sense of magic can come from. And, it used to be sorcery or magic as like a accepted human thing. You're healing somebody through magic. It's you're mixing herbs together and it's magic, things like that. So the thing is we have that side of it, and then we have the side where we have the idea of women destroying society, which has always kind of been there from Pandora's box to Eve, on that side of it. So we're looking at this, and the timelines can be super, super convoluted. So I'm just going to do my best with that side of things. But the main thing to keep in the back of your mind is as patriarchy and capitalism and these systems that are still in place today grew, women just existing in their own right became more dangerous. And witchcraft, or the rise of accusing people of witchcraft, kind of grew alongside that. So when we're listening to this, we want to kind of replace the word witch with women most of the time. So that's my general kind of preamble to what we're going to talk about.
I think it's interesting there as you're kind of saying, like, people are almost looking for an explanation. Like, as humans, that's what we're always doing. We're trying to look for a reason for something, whether that thing is real or not. So you're kind of saying that this idea of sorcery, here's the dog again, that this idea of sorcery, like, we're kind of, I guess, putting off on women in terms of using them in order to provide this explanation, but for some reason that then turns into like fear and danger rather than actually something that is like magical and like exciting. It's like given this like very negative connotation, which I also think is interesting. It's not like, it's not like seen as a strength, it's seen as a something to be fearful of.
Well, that's an interesting point you make, because sorcery wasn't to be feared until it was blamed on women. So before these more Christian areas, there were more men accused of kind of sorcery and magic using, but they were just kind of like, we'll throw you in the stocks. We're not going to murder you. Women weren't thought to be capable of magic because they weren't smart enough or capable enough. It was before the reasons
that point is ridiculous in itself, right? Yeah. Like, what on earth? Like, surely it can't be this. Like, there's no way they're smart enough to be able to do magic.
Right. I know exactly. Like, only these men can have the education to be a sorcerer.
Oh my gosh.
I know. So I'll go into that a little bit more about when that change started to happen. But I think we should talk about where the general idea puppy.
I think I'm gonna press pause and just remove the dog. The dog is currently licking my face. Okay, BRB. Okay, so going into the Brewsters, or like alewives. This is something I thought was interesting because I think it like paints a really nice kind of visual of kind of what it might have been kind of like that, like kind of back then. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read out a little passage which I took from the Museum of Oxford website, mostly because I want to get like the visual in there and not, explain it badly. All right, so here you go. So, some historians have noted the similarities between the efficacious commonly associated with alewives and the common portrayal of witches. So, even today, that there's these stereotypical images of alewives that we associate with witches. So these are things like bubbling cauldrons or black cats, pointy hats, basically Kristin, broomsticks. So these seem to stem directly from alewives and their negative portrayal. So one of the visuals I really like here is it says it was traditional for an alewife to display a broomstick outside their home, sometimes known as an ale stick, to signal that ale was available to purchase. And then obviously kind of cats were an ally of the alewives. They kept mice out of their grain supplies. Tall black hat was thought to be part of like the unofficial uniform for brewers. So this kind of helped them to stand out in public, kind of as like a marketing sort of thing. So I think it's interesting how this stereotypical stereotypical view.
I would love a stereotypical brew right now.
Yes, please. But view of kind of alewives or brewers is then put onto witches. And I think, and Kristin, please tell me if I'm wrong, but I think I was listening to something where they were saying there was almost I think, again, like a kind of fear from, say, male brewers of the kind of women like taking over the business because they were kind of good at kind of brewing and so on. So it was taking away from them and kind of, I guess, their position in society. And this is one of the reasons of the negative portrayal. Is that something that you've seen as well?
Yes. Yeah. So it's basic. That's basically it. Essentially, this was a women's job. Most of them were actually married women because they would need the money to, invest in the wheat and everything like that. But it was more of just like women doing this for the most part. Mm-hmm. But it became so important at the time because water was dangerous to drink, and people started to realize that actually you're boiling beer, it's much safer to drink than water. And that's when men started to realize that beer was profitable. And this is where we get that it's not just religion, it's secular, it's combined with like the capitalism and all these other things. And so essentially they started basically spreading rumors that women were poisoning the beer and being all gross. So they're like, they're like going to the toilet in the beer, they're putting animals in it, they've got like warts that they're putting into the beer, like this, that.
Oh my
They're
gosh.
actually adding to that hat and broom aesthetic, the warts, the grossness, just like really making these, what did you call them, the beer women? What are they called?
Alewives?
Making the alewives, sorry, I forgot, seem gross so people wouldn't want to buy them. And that's kind of that initial kind of where the more Christian view of the witch comes from. Yeah, it wasn't because men were like, oh, I'm threatened because you're going to take over my ale business. It was men going, I want the ale business because I want the money.
I want part of this.
Yeah. And they couldn't go, oh, well, we can also do this and do a actual thing and compete. It was, no, we're just going to drive you out of business by accusing you to be a witch.
Yeah.
So
like why? like why do they decide to, like you say, you provide like a perfectly good way that, you know, they can both do this. There's enough for everybody. We realize that this is something that we need. Maybe we can get on it as well. No, instead we're just going to bring down the women, and not just bring them down, but actually accuse them of being witches, and actually get them all murdered, basically.
Yeah, basically.
Like how bizarre. And I wonder if, like, when that was initially starting to kind of become the narrative, like, that was being spun, if the people who were spinning that actually realized how far this was going to go.
I doubt it. I mean, I saw a study the other day that said only 15% of people are self-aware, and I have a feeling that back then it was significantly less. And so I think people were just doing whatever they wanted and not thinking about how it impacted other people. They didn't care. And they just wanted to do what they could. Some, you know, maybe some people were just doing it to survive. It was a good business, money-making thing. But at the same time, like, let's not get people murdered. But I guess that was more of just part of life at the time. Like, people were going to watch hangings for taking their kids out for the day for fun. Like, ooh, let's go see the witch get, you know, unalived. What a fun family day out. So,
wow.
But it really demonstrates how patriarchy works. So this, you know, obviously research shows this would never happen in a matriarchy because it's not that kind of hierarchical power dynamic where you have to knock somebody off to do well. So we should maybe do an episode on like the different kind of power structures, but essentially it was that kind of, it's a reaction to women taking up a bit more social space, really, not economic space, not much. I guess they were taking up a little bit with, you know, the beer, but nothing else really. So it became a reaction to that. And I think it's important to mention as well, like, a lot of people were looking at witches like, ooh, this is a cool topic, it's interesting. Oh, I had a witch in my family, this is a cool topic of conversation. But like, at least hundreds of thousands of people died. In the 70s, they were saying like millions. Now we're saying ranging in the 100,000s. But the thing is, it's like, this wasn't actively recorded. Only the people that were burned at the stake or hung were pretty much recorded. This never recorded death from imprisonment, assault, other means. And so loads of people died. And I think it's important to emphasize that. Like, this was a reaction of a bunch of things combining, whether that be individual situations and religious and patriarchal structures, capitalism, things like that, building up over time. And as women took up more space in society, you know, this kind of, the beer wife, I keep forgetting the actual name, and everything else formed as this, like, in one perfect storm of like this general idea of the evil witch. And there were some really important intersections of historical events that took place that furthered this. But I didn't know if you had anything to kind of mention now, or if you wanted to chime in on anything.
Yeah, I think what I'm thinking about is just this idea of like taking up space. And I think this is something that's still like a lot of women don't want to say like struggle with, but like compete with in a way, is this idea of taking up space. It's just interesting almost hearing it kind of stem back kind of to this time, like around the time when kind of witches are being accused. And it's almost like, well, actually this started from, yeah, women being independent, taking up space, being successful. And then, as you say, like the horrors kind of that's happening afterwards, and the insane kind of number of women who are being accused and being killed, almost like stems down from like to taking up space.
Yeah, it really does. And it is about, it's like you said, it's misogyny, it's women existing, it causes prejudice and beyond, which is misogyny essentially. And while men were killed, you know, in the witch trials and arrested and accused as being witches, there was significantly less. And also their rate of, I think maybe 20% were accused and only 30% of those were killed. Obviously still horrible, but this whole situation is based in misogyny. And the important intersection in time that we're talking about is the invention of the printing press. Yes. Which the reason I'm transitioning into that is because your statement about like women taking up space, the two men who had the most impact were basically just pissed off about women existing. And they were like, ooh, this whole printing press thing's fun. So the printing press was invented in 1454. And so basically the printing press and a couple of old school incels essentially activated this whole situation. So like I mentioned before, this era, more men were accused but not murdered to be magic users. They were like, oh, Gary over there, he's doing some cool educational magic that we're going to call sorcery. Like, stop it. That's not good. And it was all fine. Which I think we should still note is misogyny, because it's like women aren't smart enough to be witches or sorceresses. Sorry.
It's just it's so frustrating how like suddenly they're like, you know, actually let's change what we believe. Actually, yes, it is. Like, of course, like women can, and that comes down to like even then it's like not the fact that actually women could like wield magic and sorcery, it's that they were tempted by the devil and then they were able to do sorcery. It's like we couldn't even do that on our own.
Oh my god. Like, oh my god, that is such a good point. Like, women aren't like educating themselves in sorcery because that would be crazy. They're just corrupted by the devil.
Yeah, exactly. It's Satan.
Yeah,
this can't be the women. It can't be that women were able to learn this stuff. It's the devil. Sorry. Like,
this is why it's so frustrating to read all this. Like, what is it?
I know.
And so essentially what we're seeing here is this broad media campaign using all of that era's kind of communication capabilities. So we've got the printing press for those who could read. We have sermons for those who couldn't read, and loads of visual representation of witches that we start to see kind of this representation of the alewife and stuff like that. So the main one, invented by incels number 1 and 2 in conjunction, was the Malleus Malefic.
I can never say this.
I'm a witch, so I can't say it.
Maleficarum.
Yes, and that was printed in 1486, and it is it means the hammer of the witches, which is actually could be quite cool.
Ooh.
And it
is cool, yeah.
Escalated so quickly because it was invented in Germany, where the printing press was invented. So it was like right at the same time, and it spread like wildfire through Western Europe. The main writer, basically blamed women for his lust towards them. So he really valued his purity as a man because he was very religious. So obviously, like, linking back to what we talked about last week with ambivalent sexism theory, like, it's women's fault for being the seductress, of course. And so this was really the start of like hating and being scared of women as witches. So a big thing in this was women are impure, they're evil, they doubt the faith, they're so vulnerable to demons, unlike men who are just so invulnerable, but somehow also vulnerable to witches. Women are weak and feeble of mind, like it's Eve's fault because she damned women from the beginning. Interestingly, maleficarum means sorceress. So that gendered aspect. So we're not talking about hammer of the sorcerer or the kind of magic user. We're talking about hammer of the sorceress, the gendered woman magic user. And so it's from the beginning. It's women's fault. Women are the bad magic users. Of course. Yeah.
And I think I remember reading something in relation to this where like this was even used as, you know, reasons for why like women were getting like actually it was their fault because they're witches. Like you say, they're kind of seducing the men, so it's actually their fault that they're getting and that's just absolutely wild, isn't it? But we still see, like, even though it's not like tied to like witches nowadays, but we still see that sort of narrative where actually it's the woman's fault because of like what they're wearing and so on. So it's interesting how that has almost stuck.
Yeah, it really has. And what would happen back then is, okay, well, you were accused of being a witch because you were sexually assaulted, and it was like a way to stave off responsibility and blame the woman, but then the woman would probably be murdered as a result, which you do see again in modern society. Like, they're obviously, hopefully not again being assaulted again physically, but the mental assault, which we see like countlessly in the news, like on her personality, on her decisions and things like that. And that's a really interesting thing to bring up. Very frustrating.
Yeah, I think it's like, because I don't think I've ever really thought about, you know, I haven't really thought about witches that much apart from like just what we might see like in the media and more of like modern day. But especially since like we've been digging a bit more into obviously like research into sexism, like more specifically in sport, but I think as I start to kind of understand that more, and then you go back like to kind of the witch trials and things that they were being accused of back then, it is bizarre to like make those links and see how maybe like language might have changed a bit, but actually what people are being accused of in a sense like hasn't changed that much.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's something that the author of that book I was talking about brings up. If these witch trials hadn't happened, we would probably be living in a very different world right now. Like you said, the language has changed, but the kind of base actions and the base kind of guidebook for it is pretty much still the same. And think about how long ago that was and how it's still impacting us. It's just kind of crazy. Like it's almost like, so this was written as a guide on how to persecute and murder witches, and that guide still acts today, again linking to that religious and secular kind of thing. I mean, let me read a quote from this. This is gonna piss you off.
Okay.
I'll read two quotes. Male witches are of little concern. If the evil of the woman did not exist, the world would remain unburdened of countless dangers. And the author of the book says, women, obviously weak in body and mind, spurred on by an insatiable, licentious drives, easy prey for the devil. And then the other quote is, because women are the negative counterpart to men, they corrupt male perfection through witchcraft and must be destroyed. So we're not even like saying like that witches should be destroyed. It's like, well, maybe we just extend that to women more broadly.
If we just kill all of the women, then we'll get all of the witches, and it'll be fine.
Yeah,
like obviously, everything would be great then.
The species like, won't die out or anything.
Like, no, nothing like that. No, the men can just do it on their own.
Yeah,
gosh. And again, it's just like these double standards in these quotes as well. So we're really dangerous, but we're also very weak.
Yep.
And it's like, and we kind of spoke about this a little bit like earlier, but there's this, again, like these double standards that we also have today. Like you are either too loud and like a total bitch, or like you're really shy and quiet, and like too reserved. Like you can't have like a middle ground. And it's like here we're like really dangerous but also really weak, like at the same time. And it just, it's like, who's writing these things and thinks, yeah, like this makes loads of sense.
Well, do you want to know the next person who wrote the next most important thing? Also an incel? An incel?
Okay.
For sale? I don't know. It's Friday.
Incel.
Incel. It's the book called Demonology, and it's by King James. You know, the King James that wrote the Bible? The King James Bible?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yep. So these are
going to tell us things about the Bible.
These are the ones. Well, there is some impact. These are the guys that are writing these rules. So this was in the late 1500s. It took a lot. Obviously, got to copy and paste that incel content from the Malleus Maleficarum. Essentially, King James, who was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, and fascinating history, very convoluted. I love history, but like I don't need to go into it.
I know nothing about history.
It's a good thing I'm like such a history nerd, because half of the questions on my citizenship test for the UK were like answerable from my history shows that were like partially based in fact.
Oh, nice. I would fail, but if I had to take that test, I would fail.
What time does the pub open on Sunday?
On a Sunday?
Yeah, that was one of the questions.
I don't know, like 10.
You can't be British. That's the rule.
When do they open?
12.
12. All right. That was my second answer.
Can you believe that was on my test?
No. It's very important. They don't want you turning up early or, you know, getting drunk too soon.
Right. Yeah. You got to control it, probably because of the football, I would assume.
Yeah. Makes sense.
No, I'm sure it was because of, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not even going to guess why now.
Who knows? Let's not try. Let's not try to make sense of these things.
Back to King James, the writer of the King James Bible. Not writer, but like the editor, essentially. He blamed witches for the death of his mother. And there was also some really bad storm that happened when he was trying to cross the sea for some war or something, I don't know. And he blamed witches for trying to kill him. Obviously, he didn't have anyone specifically in mind, just witches more broadly.
Witches, you know, just the witches.
Those damn witches. So here's one example from the Bible that he changed. This is Exodus 22:18. And the quote we know is, "Thou shalt not permit a witch to live," or "You shall not permit a sorceress to live." What's your thought about that? Do you think that was the original? The OG?
I don't know what the original was.
The original was, "Thou shalt not permit a poisoner to live."
Oh, okay. I was going to say it would be kind of weird if it was like that explicit in terms of a witch, or like that seems very explicit, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the King James Bible now says, "Thou shalt not permit a witch to live," but he changed it from "Thou shalt not permit a poisoner to live."
Interesting. So somebody else wrote poisoner and he changed it to witch, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. And I keep thinking here, like the religious ties are interesting. It's because they can't be like, oh, maybe like God's upset with us, so there's been a storm. You know what I mean?
Oh my God, that's such a good point.
Like God is like, no offense to anybody religious, like God is great, right?
Yeah.
So therefore he, she could not have kind of brought this storm to him and brought this kind of these kind of bad events to him, so therefore it's a witch.
Well, I mean, how would God bring that upon the king who's supposed to have divine power from God? This so it has to be happened. Witches. Oh my God, I'm going to go on a little tangent.
Yeah.
Okay, no, you go first.
Okay. No, I was just going to say, why couldn't it just have been the devil? Why can't you just say, "You shall not permit like the devil to live," or like Satan to live? Why is it specifically a sorceress?
I feel like poisoner was
witch,
fine.
And like poisoner was totally fine. Like
poisoner makes sense. Like, okay, let's not let poisoners poison us. That's fine. Like, if
it's like, let's just focus on like one group of people who may potentially poison.
Yeah.
Like, anyway.
Yeah. And just to emphasize, like, Like, we're not bashing religion as a concept. We're bashing the specific things that like happened that people did.
It's like when it's used in a way that like puts other people down, or like it's used as a way to like make sense of something that is then harming other people. It's like, don't use like religion as a tool to then, you know, like basically spread lies about certain groups of people
and harm,
you know.
and like you said, harm people. And
Yeah.
going back to what you were saying about like the convenience of, okay, well, why does it have to be witches? Why can't it just be God? Because that would be an inconvenient thing for his
Yes.
being king. He wouldn't like what's going on, like God's trying to kill him now, or God's letting the devil try to kill him. Another, okay, here's my tangent. So Joan of Arc, 1400s. So this was a bit before. This was in, I think, the 100-Year War between England and France. And, you know, she was this badass, you know, woman. She was like 17 when all this went down. Convinced the French king, forget his name, that she had visions from God, that she could help. I think it was Charles. She could help him win, blah, blah, blah. She was this divine maiden. She was amazing. She got captured by the English and got accused to be a witch. And basically what happened is, well, the French went, well, if she was a divine maiden, she wouldn't have been able to be captured. So obviously she's an evil witch. That didn't affect his becoming king, though. He was still like, you know, a valid king. You know?
Wow.
Yeah.
Like the logic is just insane. Yeah. I don't know. It's like, surely if she's a witch, she would have flown away and you wouldn't have been able to catch her either.
Right. That's such a good point.
Like,
I mean, that was one of the criteria for witches in King James's demonology book, was they must be able to fly away, especially for the purpose of like demonic meetings. So why wouldn't she just fly away for her demonic meeting?
oh my gosh. Wow.
Do you want to know what demonology describes as, what is it, an order of the most evil women, like the 3 most evil women they could imagine?
Okay, yeah.
So concubines, which obviously are sex workers that are owned by men, midwives, and dominating wives, wives that kind of overtake their husbands.
Why?
For those listening and not watching, Laura's face right now is a mixture of of shock and annoyance.
Like,
and
again, it's like the logic is just so bad. Like, surely the ones who are most dangerous, isn't it, like the ones that are like independent, like not married? And I think that was kind of a narrative that was also sort of put out there. But the fact that it's like you say, like concubines, so literally owned by men. And so is this maybe, I suppose, these, I guess, most evil women, they have been labeled this because it's like the most dangerous for men. Do you know what I mean?
Maybe.
Like, that's almost like how it feels. Is it's like these are the types of women that perhaps they encounter, and for them, like these are the most. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, for the concubines, I mean, they're obviously using their feminine wiles to manipulate the men.
Obviously.
When we're going back to our sexism conversation from last week, these are probably the men, I mean, the women, like we were talking about, that are set outside that more traditional role and are a threat, maybe.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting as well. It's like the more like women move away from that traditional and kind of stereotypical view of like what a woman should be, and you should be nice and kind of well mannered and da 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 da.
What women should be as described by men or patriarchy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
Basically how the men want you to be. Like if you step away from that, then witch.
Yeah. Yeah. And today is just bitch. Like it's like
yes. Yeah. Did they like come from one another?
I don't know. I know that witch bitch has been used as an insult towards women, you know, in more like recent decades. I can't remember the exact people. Maybe I'll try and bring that in for next time. But we should definitely look that up because it would make sense.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
as we're looking at this, obviously, the printing press happened. more criteria for what a witch was or wasn't, more about like what a witch was. They didn't really have a ruling out process other than like the really double standardy ones, like where if you float, you're a witch, but if you drown, you're fine, but you're also dead.
So... Oh my god! Like, I can just imagine. Can you just imagine, like a group of men like sitting around a table, being like, "Right, let's write this guide as to what counts if you're a witch, and let's write some of these like tests that we can do." Mm-hmm. And like, who was like, "This is an amazing idea"? Like, who said that? Was nobody like, if she's not a witch, then she's dead? And they're like, "Yeah, that's all right. That's fine." Like, somebody gave that the okay.
I think it's either not inconvenient if a woman dies, or it's also could be convenient. Like, well, what if I want to get rid of my wife? You know what I mean? Like, either she's accused as a witch and is burnt at the stake, or we just chuck her in the well and she's hogtied and she just floats to the bottom. Oh no, she was innocent. Poor me. Somebody come care for me. I'm so sad.
Win-win.
Right.
And I really want to know, like, again, like, is this something they were aware of or not? And like you say, like, what, 15% of people are actually self-aware. But were they doing this with this, like, malicious intent just to, like, wipe out women? Or did they genuinely, like, think that they were witches and had been, like, taken by the devil? Like, what was it?
I think it was probably a combination. I think there was probably a lot of fear going on, and fear driven by like that top end. Like, if I'm even associated with a witch and don't report her, I could be killed, or I'm afraid of a witch corrupting me and XYZ. So there was probably fear, but there's always just bad people as well. I think, there are so many reports of people using this as a convenient way to, we don't have time to necessarily discuss the Salem witch trials, which were later on, but this became like, it was crazy. It became more of a way of getting property, or, getting rid of somebody you're not a fan of. So that would be I wish we could find out. I really wish we could find out the answer to that.
It would be really interesting, I think, just to like be in some of those conversations that people were having back then. And it like, do people generally believe this, or some people, like you say, more just being led by fear? And I suppose that's somewhat of what can be kind of seen nowadays with like a whole host of things, where some people might not necessarily believe and say what's happening in the world, but we go along with it because it's easier. It's like the path of least resistance. We're just kind of following society like sheep, rather than calling something out and putting ourselves in a higher risk position. So yeah, it would have been interesting to see what it was like to be around kind of at that time. Well, also not. I also do not want to know.
We would have been burned.
Kind of interested.
Yeah, if we could just like go and look
by now.
Yeah, but the other thing is we wouldn't be able to go and look and not do anything about it.
Yeah,
that would be an issue. I think relating to that point, so connecting that. Well, firstly, I think it's important to note through all this that humans are so socially driven to kind of stay and go with the structures that we see everyone else doing, because that's what we've evolved to do, and that's safe. And so you really see evidence in a lot of this, almost like avoiding punishment, avoiding social and physical punishment by going along with it. But eventually this became law of the land. So it's not just like religious law, it's law of the land. Henry VIII made it a law where, witches were supposed to be murdered, obviously. Or was it Henry VII? I can't remember. Henry VIII. Obviously, Henry VIII was the head of church and state, and the reason that so many people went over to the states to get that separation of church and state, so like that is still convoluted, obviously not working in America very well right now. Anyway, but as this happened, the persecution of witches and publishing all these guides became a gold mine for publishers. Men of education started writing like different texts on this. So really you see that it's not just a religious driven thing, but it's like a more societal driven thing, which we tend to see that interaction quite consistently. I think you were going to talk about how men were kind of scared about women now taking their jobs as well. Like, men of education are starting to go, oh shit, women are there as competition.
Yeah, totally. And like we were saying before, like in terms of the like alewives, that was, well, I suppose competition, or here's a good idea, let's jump on it and not let the women get it. But I think this was also happening a lot in terms of when we think about medicine, or back then they might have kind of called it like healers, or kind of obviously like doctors. But the male doctors were wanting to like eliminate the competition in terms of female healers. And there is some research that we found that I think it might have been from this year or last year, but that discusses the impact of this on like nursing and midwifery kind of professions, and how a lot of, obviously, like I think you said, didn't you, like one of the most evil types of women is a midwife. Obviously bringing children into the world. Oh my god. So actually there was a lot of it sounds like there was a lot of kind of learnings, a lot of kind of teachings that were lost around that time in terms of these practices from like nurses and midwives, because they were getting wiped out. And the potential link is, because of this fear from male doctors wanting to get rid of the competition.
It just made me just triggered in my head, like I'm assuming that midwives and healers who were women would have had like written texts or even just pictures of the herbs they're using in combination of different procedures they're doing. Like I wonder if that's related at all to like the witches, like a witch's book. What's it called? I should know this.
Potion book.
No, what's it called? Oh, I need to Google this because it's going to piss me off. Yeah. It's going to come to me as soon as I...
But okay, so like how, again, like this kind of imagery kind of being taken so how we kind of stereotypically see a witch is maybe kind of coming a bit from kind of nurses and like writing down practices and so on.
Grimoire. Sorry, got there.
A what? I don't think I've ever heard of that before.
Really? A grimoire? It's like it's like the book that details all of a witch's spells.
Wow. I learned something. Grimoire.
I'm here to educate / Google is because I forgot the word.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I think that it ties in really well to what you were saying before about how this is like such a precursor to what we're experiencing today, that fear that women's existence is going to somehow take jobs or power or money away from men. I think, like you said, that's the first from the midwives, I don't know, beer ladies. Ale.
the beer ladies.
From the beer ladies through to the midwives and all that kind of stuff. They started to see women as economic competition as well, and that's what we still kind of experience. So as we talked about before this, accusations, especially when it was about male magic users, were more like a day in the stocks. As soon as these heavily published and propagandized texts were saying it was basically a female issue, a woman's issue, punishments became extremely severe. There were sexual aspects of torture that I won't really get into because it's quite upsetting. Oh, it's kind of like what you said. Men felt they were being targeted by women stepping outside of the box that they had made for them. And this is where we start to see that intersectional bit tie in a little bit more. Records of intersectional discrimination are not great for the time, but we can do some digging. So, for example, upper and middle class women could become nuns and were thought to be safe from becoming witches because they were so holy. But if you weren't a nun, there was a chance of being a witch, like a big chance. And once you started that witchy process, you couldn't go back. So
the witchification process has begun.
That's amazing. We see an intersection of, if you're poor, you're more likely to be a witch because only upper and middle class women could become nuns, or they were just kind of protected anyway by their purity as wealthy, I don't know, divine people.
Yeah. And I think I read somewhere where it was like, even if like a richer woman was accused, then it would basically just get swept under the carpet.
What?
Again,
that's
because
so
of
surprising.
This, like,
that's so weird.
Like power and privilege, right? Oh my god. What a surprise.
Right? And this leads us into, I think that more intersectional side is so much more obvious in the latter aspects of the actual active witch hunts, which ended kind of in the 1700s. So in the late 1600s, there were witches in Bideford in England, which were basically just poor women on the streets who had, whether they like lost their husbands, they were really old, maybe they were just spinsters, which means you're like 26 and don't have kids and or a husband. And they like essentially had to huddle together to protect against assault because that was so common at the time. These were women on the fringe. They weren't owned by a man, maybe a bit eccentric. They would all be blamed as being witches. So for example, like, oh, my crops were flooded the other day. It's because I didn't give that evil beggar lady money when she asked for it, and now she cursed me. That was quite common. The Salem witch trials, which I briefly touched on, was a lot about property. And so as the active witch trials ended, it became less about religion and more secular, essentially. So that's kind of, I think, where we end the active witch trial discussion. What are your thoughts?
And was it kind of with the I guess uprising, if you like, of science, which kind of stopped some of these accusations? Was that something that kind of coincided with it? Do you know? Or
a lot of people think that. I think I had a note about that somewhere. Let me try and find it.
Because I think something that just stands out to me, like throughout this whole conversation, is again just around how there seems to be so little logic in terms of a lot of the decisions and a lot of the assumptions that are being made, and that I suppose like potentially something like science is maybe like this kind of shift in mindset, and less a shift away, I suppose, from more religious ways of thinking.
So if we look back at how science was formed, it's very anti-nature and anti-woman. Actually, something we want to talk about next time is how much they are tied together and how witchcraft was used to almost like tackle both nature and women at the same time. And so I don't think the Enlightenment helped negate the witch trials. It was actually made it worse in certain ways. And so like some people think that Enlightenment helped the ending of the witch trials, but actually it just made it more like more secular, more ingrained in society, but it was less active, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, think about the book we use a
lot.
Oh well, here we are.
Here we
are. You know, I think when we're looking for next week, because we'll try and wrap it up here in a sec. Geez, we're like, maybe if we can get 45 minutes out of this episode, we could probably go another half an hour.
Yeah. Like, don't worry if it's only 45 minutes, that's fine.
We're like, okay, it's a Friday.
Stop.
I think the main like thing that bothers us so much is that double standard that you mentioned. So are we these all-powerful beings that can corrupt, like that can control the weather to try and murder a king? Or are we too feeble and weak to learn magic? That's the question.
I mean, definitely the former. I mean, I'd go with the former if possible, but you know.
Yeah, well, the thing is, if you are the former, then murder. But if you're the second,
I'm dead.
Yeah. But if you're the second, then you're super weak, so you're going to be corrupted by the devil, so also murder.
Oh my gosh, of course. That makes so much sense.
Yeah, right? God.
Wow.
I wonder who developed the system.
Oh my god. That's a great question. Yeah. What a great question.
It's just something about those double standards that we talk about a lot.
I think that's probably... like you said there, I think the main thing is just the frustration around the double standards and the lack of logic that goes into this, and ultimately just how I don't know. There's not even a proper word to like explain how horrifically like these women were treated. But like the more you look into it, and like you say, and like the numbers on it are absolutely wild, and it's not even accounting for everybody. The way that they were killed and the way that we were treated is absolutely horrendous, and it would just be absolutely terrifying to be around in this time, right? And it's just bizarre that this stuff happened. It feels like fantasy, really.
Yeah, that's such a good, it does feel like something that shouldn't be in real life. I'm going to sum up your assessment of it as stupid and evil.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So just to kind of lead us into next week's episode, where we're going to talk about how this whole situation impacts us today, how old school ideas around witches impact us now, touching on both history and the modern age. Just recognizing that all women, even those who weren't accused of being witches, felt the effects of these witch hunts. So this is where you get this, it kind of like induced a lot of women to feeling the need to be discreet, to not make waves, to be very docile. It also really persuaded a lot of women of their own guilt. You know, like, we really believe that we have this fundamental wickedness that allows us to become this if we're weak too weak. And so you can see how that starts impacting people, and, you know, in the 1800s and 1900s and so on. I mean, we're not that far removed from it. And importantly, while women, you know, from like maybe around the 1100s or so, women didn't have much autonomy, because that's around the time when marriage started to be like, oh, women are, you know, traded for some cows as property and all that kind of fun stuff. They did have like a small amount. Your face right now, Laura's just getting so pissed off.
Cows?
Yeah.
I do love a cow, but
yeah. But still.
But still.
Exactly. Like, women did have that little bit amount of freedom. So, for example, the beer ladies, why can't I remember their...
That's the new name.
Why can't I remember their name? I don't know. Alewives.
Yeah. Well, I mean, apparently, according to one source, like, yes. Who really knows?
I mean, I feel like Oxford maybe knows a little bit more than me, but also I think they're also a little problematic in their historical roots. So I think beer ladies, it's fine. Yeah. Anyway, it's evident in things like midwifery, the beer ladies, and things like that, that women did have these kind of small bits of freedom. They were important members of society that provided a lot of value in their kind of that active work, but also, like, obviously keeping in mind that women provide essential value in the free labor, and heavy quotes, that they do, because basically they're doing a shit ton of work for free. Anyway, by the 1800s, the idea of married women as property was universal law throughout Europe and America. The idea that women had no jurisdictional rights, they had no right to own their own property. This is when the witch hunts were finally over. But all these things occurred. So women couldn't have property, they couldn't vote. So at this point, the witch hunts had served their purpose. So I think that's the freaky thing about this. Well, one of the many freaky things about this whole thing. And I think that's where we'll probably pick up next week.
Yeah. What a way to bring a woman down.
I know. And the vibe of our podcast. So maybe I should have thought about something more exciting. What's good? It's almost Halloween.
Woo! It is nearly Halloween. Yeah, dress up as a witch. Woo! Or not.
Well, I'm looking forward to next week's episode, where we're gonna have kind of that discussion. And yeah, we're so bad at ending. We gotta figure something better out.
What is an ending? We could just keep talking instead. But
I know. Well,
we shall end.
The whole reason we started a podcast is because we don't know how to shut up when we're talking to each other.
But yeah, so that was that for today, and hope you found it interesting. I think I think it's interesting and scary to make some of these links, but yeah, as we're moving into Halloween and seeing witches around, I think it's kind of cool to consider a little bit more about where that's coming from. But yeah, we'll see you next time.
See you next week,
where we talk about the present day.
Woo!
Do we need to talk about socials or not?
Oh shit, yeah. No. We're so good at this, guys. I thought we were getting better, but
we need to write this down. I think,
don't we? I need to like put something big on my like computer screen or something. You can find us on But Why Pod on TikTok and Instagram. You can find me at Dr. Kristin on the same. and Laura remains elusive.
Whoa, like a ghost.
The end.
Bye.
Bye.